the floor throw questions at the people at the front. This is very much an occasion for the people at the front to be asking questions back the other way. Not to say that you can't throw in questions if you wish to do so, but to understand that the gentlemen who are here today are very much here to learn from you, find out what it is you think that they should be considering, and hence they'll be asking questions in relation to that. All right. Just a little bit of history for you. I'm sure most people who are participating today or who are watching online are aware of Path to Excellence Part 1, which looked at services that needed work done quite quickly, and which is now basically moved on. We've now moved on to the next stage, which is Path to Excellence 2, which is looking at in-hospital services, emergency care and acute medicine, emergency surgery, planned care, including surgery and outpatients. So the conversations are really revolved around that, though obviously some elements of that might extend to other elements of care that people want to talk about as well. So that gives you a little bit of the background. I'm going to invite Councillor Angela Hamilton to open the meeting with what she would like to discuss first of all, and present to us what she would like the group here to think about.
Okay. Thank you. As I said, my name's Councillor Angela Hamilton. Just Angela though, please. I represent Beacon and Bents ward in South Shields. It's one of the largest geographical wards in the borough and has high levels of deprivation. I've been asked to come along here by residents from that ward to put forward some of their thoughts and opinions and experiences about the use of the hospital and what it will mean to them when if and when services are moved away from the hospital and to Sunderland. And to raise some concerns about the process that's been undertaken both now and previously. Just to give you a little bit of background about myself, I work for Newcastle City Council, so in a policy and communications role, so I'm well aware of communications, consultations, that kind of activity. I represent disabled members nationally on Unison's National Executive Council, and I'm a disabled person myself, so have quite a knowledge of experience about using the hospitals. I formerly worked for the Disability Rights Commission, so again have quite a bit of understanding about some of the issues that are faced by some of those who are most excluded and isolated within our society. And I think in some ways it's those people as much as anybody else that I'm here to speak on behalf of today, those people who can't always speak on behalf of themselves. I'm aware that this consultation is about phase 2 of the proposals for the hospital, and received a presentation in my role as a councillor approximately 6 weeks ago at a community area forum meeting. I raised a number of concerns there, and I'm going to raise very similar concerns here. My first concern is that you're progressing with this before the outcome of the judicial review, which is being heard next week on phase 2, has completed, and I feel that that is a little inappropriate to be moving forward when, depending on the outcome of phase 1, you may have to halt everything. And look, I understand how judicial review works. I have a background in law, so yes, it's about the procedure, not necessarily about the outcomes, but if the procedure wasn't carried out, you have to go back and start at the beginning and carry the procedure out correctly, which could come up with different outcomes. So to begin implementing phase 1 and to start consulting on phase 2 seems very premature, given that you're almost predisposing what the judge is going to say at the hearing next week. But to move on from that and into phase 2, which I think is much more what you want to hear about today. I'm well aware that there has been a consultation amongst Unison members and staff at the hospital, and overwhelmingly they are opposed to the merger of the two hospitals. And the reasons behind that are numerous, but things like inability to get to work. They don't believe that all of the issues have been considered. That neither hospital will be able to deliver the services that they will be expected to deliver going forward, and that there are a wide range of alternatives that are apparently being considered, but nobody has been given any information or evidence about what they are. In the presentation I sat through, we were told there was 31 potential options, but nobody could tell us what any of those 31 potential options are. So to be ploughing ahead with this seems a little premature, because people can't respond to proposals that don't exist. We aren't clear what your plans are for the hospitals, except that it's going to be downgrading of services in South Tyneside, downgrading of services that people really don't feel it's going to be appropriate to be downgraded. Accident and emergency is essential, and changing the hours of accident and emergency, reducing accident and emergency cover is not really appropriate. I gave an example at the meeting I was at the council from myself. I don't like to give personal details of other people unless I've got their permission. So I used an example of myself quite recently. I have asthma, which I haven't suffered from for about 15 years, but this year it increased significantly with the hot weather, high pollen counts. And I had to go to hospital because I couldn't breathe at all. I could not have got to Sunderland Hospital, and I completely and totally believe that if I had not been able to go to accident and emergency in South Tyneside, I would be dead now. The doctors were brilliant, absolutely fantastic. We have some of the best ratings in the country for A&E, and higher than Sunderland's. So the thought of moving that to Sunderland, I think, is really not acceptable to people in the borough. I have nothing against Sunderland Hospital, in case anybody thinks I do. I also have MS, and I receive most of my specialist treatment for my MS at Sunderland City Hospital. It's the most appropriate place. Nobody's saying that things can't change. Nobody's saying that everything has to be delivered in every single hospital. We all know that's not possible. You couldn't have heart transplants in every hospital. You couldn't have MS services in every hospital. That is not possible, and we are well aware of that. But there are some services that need to be delivered in every single hospital, and that includes accident and emergency, it includes maternity, it includes all the services that you're looking at and considering moving at this stage. Excuse me one moment. And I do just want to read something. I asked people to let me know what they wanted me to say, because, as I say, I'm not here to represent myself. And somebody from my ward came back and said, I see lots of different specialists, 11 at the last count, and all but the physio are now in Sunderland. I basically have to prioritise who I can see because of the cost and hassle of getting there. Nobody should have to prioritise which medical conditions they are able to have treatment for or seek treatment for because they can't afford to get there on the bus, or because there is no transport for them to get there. People from the ward that I represent, some of them have to get 3 buses to get to a hospital in Sunderland. When you're not well or ill, you know, it's really not acceptable. I'm not saying that things can stay as they are. We all know they can't stay as they are. We need to look at options. There's very limited access, especially public transport. The staff in Sunderland don't think that they will be able to cope with the additional resource, have the capacity to deal with the additional number of patients. Staff from South Tyneside don't want to move to Sunderland. There's talk of a recruitment crisis now, and that there's not enough staff. But what are you going to do when those staff won't move to Sunderland and they go to Gateshead or Newcastle, which are much easier to get to, or they just don't work anymore in the NHS? How are you going to recruit the staff that you need in Sunderland then? How are you going to ensure that people are not dying because of the changes? The proposals are absolutely horrific. Somebody sent me something through just this morning and said that raised the issue of a young boy who died at Sunderland Hospital of sepsis. If the hospitals can't cope now, how are they going to cope with more patients and more patients and more patients? Over the last 20 years, our services have been downgraded significantly. And the way things are going, South Tyneside Hospital is going to be little more than a cottage hospital, and we deserve so much more than that. The people of this borough deserve a real hospital with real services. As I said, we know there can't be everything. We know specialist care has to be in, you know, but your basics. A&E should not be being considered for any reductions whatsoever. Maternity, all kinds of things. We've been asked to submit evidence here today, but it's very difficult to submit evidence when you don't know what the proposals are, when you've heard outlines and high level. This isn't a consultation.
It isn't.
It is a consultation.
It's not even a pre-consultation.
No,
It's
it's an exercise in giving people an opportunity, as you're doing now, to express what they think needs to be looked at in order that solutions can start to be developed. And I was thinking, I know you've probably got a little bit more to add yet.
Yeah, one thing I want to add very quickly before we do this, I think is really most important. We've been told that a small clinical design team are designing these options, are looking at pulling these options together. I don't think it should be just a small clinical design team. You need patients involved in that. You need people, the public involved in that, because the clinical design team, no disrespect to any clinician, they only see one side of it, they don't see the other side.
You'll be glad to know that this is really just the first step in a process that leads down that direction. So you're probably familiar with the legislation that governs the way in which health bodies had to formulate and then consider proposals.
Yes.
And the involvement aspect of that. So this is a starting point in getting people like yourselves to express the concerns and point towards what you think are solutions in the solutions in actually building solutions, if you like. What should be considered as part of that process in order that they're doing, I think, pretty much what you're suggesting, which is a wider involvement. And I think that with regards to the 31 options, and somebody can correct me if I'm wrong in this, but the reason that those aren't really out on the table yet, in fact, they're not really 31 options, is because there isn't even a skeleton as such. There's lots of different ideas floating around as to what needs to be considered. The idea is that this is part of a process now, as part of early involvement in drawing what people think needs to be considered in helping to shape that. And I think one of the things, bearing in mind who you've been talking about with your constituents and other parties you've spoken to, is that we need probably your recommendation for who you think needs to be involved in that process in a more substantial way, in working with clinicians and others in helping to look at what solutions should look like.
Okay. For a start, representatives of the Save South Tyneside Hospital campaign, they probably know more about the changes and the proposals and the impact than anybody else, because they've spent 2 years at least gathering evidence, looking at all the issues, and I think they could certainly point you in the right direction of the people who would be able to help. Nobody is saying that there isn't changes, but they would be able to give you those ideas and those suggestions, and they would be able to work with you, and I think they would work with you in a positive way. The trade unions, obviously, in the hospital, from the staff side, cleaners, nurses, everybody, not just clinicians. It's a much, much wider. I work for a council. The person who knows the most about how a council works is normally the cleaner, because they see everything. They go around everywhere. It's not the chief exec at the top. Again, no disrespect to the chief exec at the top, but they don't see as much. They don't hear from people. It's the people at the bottom, the people on the ground, the people who are front-facing, who see what goes on. And it's amazing how many ideas they can come up with that are so simple and yet so innovative at the same time, that can do so much, that can change things, that can just be, and those are the people that need to be involved from the beginning. I'm not saying you have the whole of South Tyneside residents involved. It's not possible. Yeah. It's seriously not possible. But representatives of the hospital campaign, representatives of the trade unions, and all staff at all levels, maybe some members of the public that you could get through a variety of different ways to come forward who'd be interested, or some of the community and voluntary sector organisations, specifically those representing vulnerable adults, because they're the people who will find it hardest to get to services that aren't delivered where they're used to them being delivered. Young people, it's their future. It's they're going to have to live with it a lot longer than any of us around this table. And people who use the hospital on a regular basis, so people who have conditions or disabilities where they need to be using the hospital on a regular basis, where they're going to be most impacted by the changes. They need to be involved, and they're the people that you need to talk to. Now, I could give you ideas and names, but obviously without permission in public, I'm not going to,
No, I understand, of course.
Yes.
I mean, do you have any ideas, though, as to what kind of numbers? Because obviously when you involve lots of people in the process, one of the difficult things, and one of the things that's really difficult from the cost effectiveness of the process, is what kind of numbers do we involve? What type of formats do we involve them in effectively? What different parts of the process? Do you have any particular views on that?
How many clinicians do you have involved?
Good question.
So you mentioned small clinical teams, clinical design teams. We've certainly have learned from phase 1. So in phase 2, they're nothing, anything but a small clinical team. So if I was just adding up the number of clinicians who have been involved and then involved in refining, if you look at just one particular work stream, I would say it's up to about probably 30 people, senior clinicians, and not just doctors. We're talking about nursing staff, AHPs. We have already done staff engagement. I think we're not in the position to say, well, no decisions have been made, and we've certainly not circulated any of these other set ideas. We hope to be talking to our staff in more detail in the new year, but of the 31 ideas which they've gone through a certain process, that these are the ones which are workable. What are your views? So we're going to start doing that in February onwards to get more staff involved. And you're absolutely right. When we're taking staff, I'm not talking about clinicians as well. I'll go out wider to the rest of the workforce from that aspect. But certainly, in terms of the staff engagement, again, we've learnt from phase 1. That is much more wider. And it's not necessarily about meeting staff. We've got other forms as well. There's emails, there's social media we've attempted, but we should be in a better position to outline that these are the potential emerging ideas in the new year, so that we can do more consultation, pre-consultation engagement to actually refine these going forward. So we will continue to engage, and it's not a linear process either here, Angela. We always tend to go back as well.
So just to go back a step, did you say around 30 clinicians involved in the design team?
If I had to pick a particular area, the senior people who've got all the knowledge, etc., and have the guidance, national guidance, etc., to have a look at, have been involved in distilling the ideas. And we're in a position now where we can actually look to see, well, what are the potential emerging ideas, and then share with the wider staff to get more information and more ideas and more views.
Okay, well, if you're talking of a design team of 30 people who are all clinicians, I would suggest that you would have a similar number that would be made up equally of staff and lay people. And that would be as your design, part of your design team right from the beginning, right from the outset. So it's not all driven by senior clinicians who sometimes don't see the other side, or the smaller problems, or the things that, the lay person does see. Sometimes you need a fresh pair of eyes, somebody who's not necessarily understanding of the medical processes and all of those things, to just see a different idea. And as I say, I would suggest probably a similar number made up equally of other staff and lay people.
Do you have any suggestions as to how those people should be actually recruited? Is there anything that you think, from your experiences, is an appropriate way to do that?
I know it's difficult because you do get the same people coming back over and over and over again when you do.
And you don't necessarily want the
things.
usual suspects, because other people
Yes.
will say that's unfair. So, and it needs to be perhaps different people in different scenarios.
I think when you're looking at staff, you would go through trade unions and staff groups, making sure that you have a diverse range of staff, because you're going to have a range. I talk about trade unions a lot because I'm a trade union activist, but not everybody's a member of a trade union. But there will be other staff groups in the hospitals. So, there might be women's staff groups or disabled staff groups or you know, ethnic minority staff groups, making sure that there's a range of people and recruit through those people, but not necessarily all the senior people. Make sure you get somebody in staffing from different areas. Make sure you have somebody who works in the canteen or in cleaning or on reception desks, or, you know, those people see things. When it comes to the public, I think you have to look at a number of things. You have to look at, sometimes you do have to have representatives of the usual suspects. So I talked about groups representing vulnerable adults and children, and you do have to have groups that represent them. You can't just go and pick somebody off the street and say, well, you can represent them. And then I would suggest maybe asking ward councillors like myself, not to be on the group, but to work with the communities to find people who would be able to put ideas forward. I don't think you should have a load of councillors on that group, by the way. I think that would be the worst possible idea. So I think it should be real people.
Yeah.
You know, but councillors are out there, they're on the